Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi everyone, welcome back once more to As I Live and Grieve. Today is an episode I have wanted to do for quite some time now, and I finally get the opportunity to do it with one of my very, very favorite people. And she's a very favorite people in my life for a lot of reasons, but one is because we have some of the greatest discussions, and I value that very highly. So with me today is Marj Smith. Marj, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Kathy. It's great to be here.
Good. We've had many discussions over margaritas. Today, we're alcohol-free because this is a very serious discussion. The topic for today is grief a mental health illness? And I've wanted to discuss this because somewhat recently, the psychiatry, the APA, whichever organization it is that creates and defines the mental health illness diagnoses and puts it in their book, which is now a DSM-5, has added a new mental health illness that is prolonged grief. Now, you will hear many people say it's complicated grief. That is not what they added. They added prolonged grief, and there are distinct differences. So, my first thought when I heard this, of course, is grief isn't mental health. I mean, it certainly affects your mental health, obviously, but is it really qualified to be a mental health diagnosis? So, first, I thought maybe we could try to a little better, more clearly define grief. Is it a phase you go through? Is it a noun? Is it a verb? What is a definition for grief that is workable? Do you have one, Marj?
I think so. So grief is a internal and external reaction to a loss. It is emotional, it is mental, it is physical. When we experience the loss of a person, the loss of a pet, the loss of a relationship, the loss of a special piece of furniture.
Yeah.
I mean, at a house fire, we experience what we have defined as grief. That's sadness, longing for that lost item. And it's a very natural and needed part of being human. But there's also animals that grieve. I mean, most animals.
Right. Yeah, so, and sometimes you can see that in your own dogs and cats. If you have multiple animals in your household, you can actually see them suffer what we kind of label as separation anxiety after one of those pets has died. So, you mentioned the word reaction. I like that because you wouldn't have a reaction unless something happened first. Okay? So something that happened is the loss. And you mentioned a variety of losses, and we've talked about those at different times too. Loss of job, loss of a marriage, loss of, as you say, your house in a fire. If you, as a child, have to move and you lose your friendships and everything like that.
Right.
We most commonly associate it with the loss of a loved one, a family member, a spouse, a child, something like that. Because that, I think, is the one that's most commonly known, and the one that we try hardest to understand. One of our early guests on our podcast, Dr. Bill, defined grief, and it was a very simplistic definition, but I've used it many times. Grief is a natural response to an unfortunate event. Very simple, very simple. Yeah. So it can be any loss, and the event is unfortunate because it's not something we wanted to happen. And that's the other piece of it. So, most times, people kind of go through I hate to use the word phases because it reminds me of toddlers and everything. But that's what it is. We go through different phases of grief. And now some have been described by Kubler-Ross, and people think of those as phases of grief, but there are really many, many more than that. Mm-hmm. At what point does grief then become not quite as natural, such that it kind of turns that corner to where it's going toward that prolonged grief that now is in the DSM-5?
That's a very good way to introduce this, because that's exactly it. It is a natural thing that we go through. It's a natural phase, if you want to call it that. And any diagnosis, pretty much any diagnosis that's in the DSM-5 will say that impacts normal functioning to a degree that someone cannot function as they want to in their life. That's when we start saying, okay, wait a minute, something is different here. This is not just feeling sad. Maybe you have clinical depression. This is not just being really happy all the time. Maybe you are experiencing bipolar mania, so it's really that point where your normal functioning, ability to get up and go to work, ability to get up at all, ability to be social, ability to interact with people that you would normally interact with on a daily basis, able or wanting to pay bills, just all those normal things that we do. When you can't manage those things, that's when something is escalated to a diagnosis. But it's also a matter of having that impairment for a length of time. It's not just, this happened one day, so now you have a diagnosis. With PGD, prolonged grief disorder, that time frame that they have identified is 12 months. So if you're having these issues ongoing, daily, for 12 months, that's kind of like, okay, we're hitting a red flag. We need to say, maybe this is something that you need more assistance with. You need I hate to use this word, but a label for it.
Okay. And the label is probably more for the insurance companies and for pharmaceuticals than anything else, if I had to guess.
That is correct. Because once something has a label, now we can say, hey, this is a legitimate thing. And so we need to figure out a way to help this person and get it paid for.
Right.
So when I first heard that they were considering doing this, putting it in the DSM-5, I was very much like, no. Grief is natural. It's not a mental illness. You can't do this. You're going to pigeonhole people and so forth. So I've been doing research, and what I have found from a lot of the pros in this area and a lot of the gurus is that this actually is a good thing because it differentiates. That's a huge word in diagnosing things. It differentiates what someone is going through from depression or from anxiety, from bipolar, and says, no, this is a grief reaction that is severe. And we need to make sure that we're treating it as such. Not depression, because maybe that prolonged grief doesn't need an antidepressant. Maybe it needs talk therapy and certain interventions that we can do in talk therapy. An antidepressant might not help, or it might, but the point is, now that we have it pigeonholed, so to speak, as an actual disorder, we can specify treatments for it. And it also gives clinicians a better idea of what they are dealing with. They're not dealing with but they're not dealing with clinical depression. They're dealing with depression because of a different disorder.
Right.
So it really actually is a good thing that they have recognized this.
Okay. Yeah, I'm starting to think that as well. But like you, when I first heard it, I thought, whoa, no, that's not fair. So if we start at the beginning and even just take the phrase prolonged grief disorder. Now, I've had several major losses in my life. Both parents an infant, less than 24 hours old. More recently, my husband. So, and these happened over decades. I believe that I'm going to grieve for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. That's my personal belief. And a lot of people agree with that. So if I think first, 12 months? Well, let's just take my husband, the most recent one. That's been 5 years. Mm-hmm. I think, oh my God, I have a mental health diagnosis.
Right.
Do I?
No.
Probably not necessarily.
No, you don't.
So what are there additional criteria added on to that time frame?
Yes. So I can give you specifics because I looked it up.
Okay. All right.
So for
I'm
instance,
going to diagnose myself as we go along.
There you go. So one of the things that has to be present is an identity disruption. Okay. Such as feeling that you have died or a part of you has died along with that person. But remember, this has to keep happening almost daily for 12 months before this can even be considered a diagnosis.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Avoidance of reminders that the person has died. Being in denial, just like, okay, I'm going to go to lunch with this person in 2 weeks or something like that. The intense emotional pain that we feel, the anger, the bitterness, sorrow, sadness, difficulty with reintegration, meaning getting back to normal, whatever that is, normal life, engaging with friends or pursuing interests, feeling that life is meaningless, there's no reason to go on. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, there has to be at least 3 of these things, and there's a couple more symptoms that are at least 3 of these things that are clinically significant. That means they are interrupting your normal functioning on an ongoing basis every day.
Okay.
So, having known you for a while now, I can tell you that yes, and I can hear you going, click, I've experienced that, click, I've experienced that, click. But you have not experienced them to the point where you cannot function, you can't get out of bed for 12 months.
Right.
At a time.
Right. Yeah.
And you are a very social person.
I work hard at that. I'm really an introvert, but I work very hard at that. But I mean, as you were going through those criteria, that was my thought. Well, I've experienced that, but not anymore. I've experienced that, but not anymore. Right. Or maybe the first month or so that might have been me, but not anymore.
Right. Right.
So is it, and I hate to even use this, but I do it a lot. For someone that is an average person, if you were to Google prolonged grief disorder and go to a credible website like psychiatry.org and look at not only the time frame but all these criteria laid out, could the average person say, okay, I don't think this applies to me. I think I'm good.
Yes.
Is that safe for the average person to do?
No.
Okay.
No. Usually the average person who is experiencing grief, as you know yourself, you have a little bit of a cloud in your head, and you may not be thinking exactly clearly, and you don't have all of your faculties on point. And so it never hurts to go to your doctor or talk to a friend even and say, I'm just not getting back into things like I thought I would, or I'm just feeling that, why am I here? And not that I'm going to do anything, but I've thought about how could I just end it and say, you know what, I'm done. And again, it's not if that happens once or twice in a month and you say, silly me, get back to life. Yeah. It's more of, is that a persistent, constant sort of mind frame that you, or thoughts that you can't get out of?
Yeah.
That's the important thing.
Okay.
So it's always better to reach out, either to a friend to begin with, just to get some input. But also you have to remember a friend who understands that you're grieving.
Right.
Not somebody's, get over it. They died 6 months ago, you're fine.
Yeah.
That's really important. But also to reach out to a professional and say, yeah, I don't know, am I okay or not?
Yeah. Okay. And I also want people to know that if they have concerns for their own mental health or the mental health of someone close to them who is grieving and they're concerned about, it doesn't necessarily mean that going to get help is going to result in psychiatric medication for the rest of your life or anything like that. Am I correct in that sometimes with a therapist, you mentioned talk therapy, for example, sometimes just talking through it will help you heal. It will move you in the right direction because perhaps you didn't have that kind of support when you first were going through this grief. Maybe you didn't have that network of family and friends that was able to support you so that you stuffed a lot of that. Can simply talking about it help?
Yes and no.
Okay.
It really depends on the severity that somebody is dealing with. But yes, talk therapy is definitely one of the best interventions for somebody who's suffering with PGD. Because, like you said, maybe they didn't have that support, especially in our society.
Right.
It's very often hard to really allow yourself to say what you're thinking and feeling about that person you've lost.
Right.
Because, well, what's someone going to say to me? And so you do stuff it. And so everything starts going around and around in your own head, and you can't get out sometimes. So having that safe and objective place to just say, this is what I'm thinking. Am I crazy or not?
Right.
This is what I'm feeling, and I miss them so desperately. And just to have a person who can say, of course you do.
Yeah.
And allow you to have those feelings. That can make a huge difference. Huge
Well,
difference.
and sometimes I think it helps too if that person is unknown to you at the beginning.
Yes.
It's not a friend of yours that thinks, oh, goodness, it's time for you to get out there and date again. That's the last thing on my mind. So if a friend of mine suggested that to me, I would be offended. But if you go to a person that you don't really know, and that first visit it's really for both of you to decide if you've got something that you can work together. I mean, that's my opinion of that first visit. But if you have someone like that and you meet them, you can eventually, I think, become quite comfortable because this person doesn't know you. So it would be quite natural for you to tell them everything you're thinking and feeling because they're not making any assumptions. They're not guessing how you're feeling. They're waiting for you to tell them.
Correct.
And I know myself, just talking about my husband at different times helps me immensely, even at this stage in my grief.
Right. And
so
another piece of that relationship that's really important is non-judgmental.
Yes.
A therapist, no matter what you say, is not going to judge you for what you have done, what you are thinking, what you are feeling. They're going to take it where it's at and help you figure out what it means for you.
Right. Oh, I like that phrase, help you figure out what it means for you. And then at the same time, help you figure out what you can do. So can you give me any examples of things that might, if you're doing talk therapy with someone and something that you think might help them, the very basics, an exercise, homework, so to speak, that they could do. Can you give me any examples of what that might be?
Yes. So say someone is struggling with perseverating, meaning they're thinking about this person or about a certain event over and over and over and over and over, and they can't get themselves out of that perseveration. One of the things that's really important is grounding, because you're having a flight of thoughts, and they're just going, and you have no control. So being in the moment, and there's, again, mindfulness is a huge catchphrase these days.
It is. I see it everywhere.
Exactly. But it's really being in the moment. I like using that phrase better because it doesn't have that same cliche sort of feeling to it. So use your 5 senses and bring yourself back to right now. And if you're struggling with, what am I seeing? What am I smelling? What am I tasting? That's three of them.
Hearing.
There we go. What am I hearing? And the other thing is, if that's not working, try, and I know it sounds crazy, but try holding on to an ice cube. Because
an ice cube.
There is no way when it gets really cold in your hand that you can avoid thinking about right now.
Oh,
and
I like that.
It literally changes the neurons in your brain. It breaks what they're doing and brings you to the moment of, ow, my hand hurts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
ice cube therapy.
Ice cube therapy. Or stick your hand in a bowl of ice. That works also.
Yeah. Not the stove, however.
No.
You have to be safe. You have to be safe.
Yes.
Now, is that, here's another phrase I hear, and I am not a therapist. I tell everybody that. I'm not a medical professional. Is that like the senses, being in the moment, and I've heard this, probably seen it in a movie, actually, about, touch the wall,
mm-hmm.
look at the color of the paint on the wall, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that known as cognitive behavioral therapy too?
Kind of, sort of, yes. You could call it that. Cognitive behavioral is a little more defined, but that is one of the skills that you could use in cognitive behavioral, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and those are things that a therapist can help you
mm-hmm.
with.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that sounds very easy to do. And I know sometimes just the concept of going for therapy or going to see a therapist will, make people very, very resistant.
Mm-hmm.
But I think especially in an instance like this, where your life is impacted so completely that you're never the same person again, but you have become a person who can't enjoy life, really.
Right.
You are preventing yourself from even attempting to find happiness again
mm-hmm.
and a stable existence.
Mm-hmm.
That's the unfortunate part.
Right.
And because it goes on for more than a year, and maybe some people wait 5 years
mm-hmm.
before they realize they need help and go for help, that's a huge chunk of your life
mm-hmm.
that you yourself are losing. So, and especially if you have children, maybe in your household,
right,
or even grown children with children of their own, you have grandchildren or something. Those are memories you're robbing yourself of those memories, in my opinion,
mm-hmm.
because you're not able to experience them. Wow. Is there anything I'm leaving out about this DSM-5 diagnosis?
Not leaving out per se, but it's just really important to remember that even if you are experiencing some more severe symptoms of grief a year
mm-hmm.
later, it doesn't mean that you have PGD. Okay. But it also doesn't mean that you shouldn't reach out for help, because it might be escalating to PGD.
Okay.
To the point where it is so impactful that you can't continue living. Remember, everything in the DSM-5 is a guideline.
Okay.
So every person is an individual. If you meet the criteria, then you can be given that diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't quite meet the criteria, it doesn't mean you don't need help. Okay. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If it's getting close to that year and you're not functioning, hopefully somebody has said, hey, you need to reach out before 12
mm-hmm. months.
Mm-hmm. But that's just the time frame that the professionals have given it.
Right.
To say you shouldn't be and again, shouldn't, that's a very bad word. But
I know.
But you shouldn't be having such severe symptoms in a year that keep you from living at all. And
right.
That's what they're saying.
Right.
At this point.
And is it the same 12 months for children?
No, it's 6 months.
Okay.
6 months.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So keep an eye on your children as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Or your grandchildren,
mm-hmm.
if they're going through an experience like this. And maybe suggest, and I know there are some special therapists that deal with children.
Mm-hmm.
There are also some special camps. We're fortunate enough here in our area to have Camp Heartstrings that will help children as well.
Yes.
So check around your area for resources. And not for nothing, but a therapist is a great person to ask about resources
mm-hmm.
as well. So I guess the way I would sum it up is, if you're grieving, or you know someone who's grieving, the question isn't so much, oh my gosh, do they have PGD? Remember that grief is unique for every person. And just because they have set up this time frame of 12 months for adults, 6 months for children, there are other criteria that go along with it. So it's not, I'm grieving, it's been over a year, I have a mental health illness.
No.
That's not it.
No.
Okay?
No.
But you would be valid in thinking, it's been over a year, I'm still not doing well.
Right.
It might be wise to reach out so that it doesn't continue and develop into PGD.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, that is a very good way to look at it.
Okay. All right. So remember, it's not everybody's grief. It's still my grief and each person's unique grief. And if you're just unsure, then what could be better than setting up a session with a therapist and just chatting about it and let them help you decide, do you need further help or are you really doing okay? Just that confirmation, I think, that you're okay will do a lot for your own personal well-being.
Yes.
And I'm going to say that's just one more form of self-care. You're taking care of yourself by getting that reassurance.
Right. Because that reassurance lots of times doesn't come from your own community.
Exactly.
And so, like you said, that objective person outside of the picture that you know you can trust makes a huge difference.
Yep. Well, I feel a lot better about this topic now. I'm not as opposed to it as I was because I understand better now that the additional criteria the Psychiatric Association has added to it will really distinguish it from just the average person grieving more than 12 months. So I feel much better about that. Thank you for the discussion.
Certainly.
Time goes too fast in these episodes. You've heard me say that many times. But I want to turn the microphone over to you, Marj, and let people know what you're doing, how you're available, how they can reach you, and what services you might be able to offer them. Okay. It's all yours.
Okay. I've had about 12, well now closer to 15 years of experience in hospice in various roles. And currently I am doing therapy. I am a therapist, specializing in grief and loss, end of life, anything along those lines. And I'm looking to try and help people before it gets to PGD, but also working with people who do have the prolonged diagnosis. And the hope is just, again, to help people function the way they want to enjoy life, as you mentioned, and to make sure that those relationships that they have are supportive and helping them live their best life. So you can find me on Psychology Today, and also you can just email me directly at Marj, which is different. It's MARJ, at healwithmarj.com. The website is still in the makings. It's not quite there yet, but all of the information is on Psychology Today. So if you do want to reach out, I'd be happy to talk to anybody who just wants to find out if they're doing okay or not.
That's great. And I have to say to everyone listening out there that if you just want to find someone who you can start with, Marj is excellent. She's got a heart as big as the world. She's got a great sense of humor, which doesn't hurt, if you need to heal. And she's a great, great listener. So I think you can't go wrong reaching out to Marj. As always, her contact information will be in our episode notes and also on our website. If for some reason you can't remember how to do any of that, just reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with Marj, no problem. So it's time we have to wrap up. Consider everything we've said. Don't stress if you've been grieving for more than 12 months, but do be aware of how your grief is impacting your life. And again, if you know someone who's grieving, don't just be cold and say, you need to get some help, But maybe just mention the podcast and some of the criteria and everything and work the conversation around. And hopefully you can help them get some help too. We have to take care of each other. It's just something we have to do. On that note, I'll let everyone go. Everybody enjoy your week, and we'll catch you next time as we all continue to live in grief.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveinGrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.